"Can you buy this coat?" Daniel Carter slowed. He turned his head, scanning the busy street. Then Daniel looked down. A little girl stood in front of him. In front of her, placed carefully on the edge of a borrowed table, was a single item. A worn coat. Daniel frowned slightly and glanced around as if expecting someone else. "Are you talking to me?" he asked, his tone calm, but touched with surprise. "You're asking me?" The girl nodded. Daniel let out a short breath. "Buy this coat," he repeated, looking at it more closely. "You want me to buy this?" "Yes, sir," a nearby voice cut in. "That torn coat, is she really trying to sell it?" Another person laughed lightly. "Honey, nobody's buying that thing, sir," a vendor added, leaning forward. "Don't waste your money. That's not worth anything." Daniel didn't respond to them. His attention stayed on the girl. "Why are you selling your coat?" he asked. "My brother's in the hospital," she said. "He needs surgery." Daniel nodded slowly, then gestured lightly toward the coat. "Even if I buy it," he said, not unkindly, "this won't be worth enough to pay for surgery." "Not even close." "I know," she replied. "I just need something. Anything helps." The voices behind him rose again. "Sir, just walk away. Don't get involved." Daniel straightened slightly. "This isn't how things work," he said. "You should be with your mother." "She's at the hospital," the girl answered. He gave a small nod, already stepping back. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't help you." He turned. "Sir, please." Her voice stopped him again. Daniel closed his eyes briefly before turning back. She had stepped closer now. "If you buy it, my brother will get his surgery today," she said. Daniel shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "That's not how it works." The girl swallowed, then quickly lifted the coat in both hands. "It's still good," she said, turning it over carefully. "See, it's still warm. It still works." As she flipped it again, something slipped loose. A folded paper fell from inside the lining and landed near Daniel's shoes. He bent down and picked it up. The paper was creased and worn, as if it had been opened and folded too many times. He unfolded it slowly. A hospital bill. His eyes moved across the page, and this time the details were impossible to ignore. Patient name Noah Johnson. Age 4 years old. Medical condition congenital heart defect. Urgent surgical intervention required. Hospital Street Mary's Children's Hospital, New York. Attending physician, Dr. Emily Carter. Status payment overdue. Surgery pending. Total balance due. Final notice. Failure to pay will result in discharge and cancellation of scheduled procedure. Daniel's grip on the paper tightened slightly. He looked up at the girl. "You've been carrying this?" he asked. She nodded. "I wanted to show people, so they know I'm telling the truth." The market noise seemed to fade for a moment. Daniel glanced back down at the bill, then at the coat in her hands. "How much are you selling this for?" he asked. The girl hesitated for just a second. $20, she said. Daniel's brows drew together slightly. $20, he repeated. "And if you sell it, what are you going to wear in this weather?" The wind passed between them again. Sharper this time. The girl looked down at the coat, her fingers tightening around the fabric. Then she lifted her eyes back to his. "If he gets the surgery," she said quietly, "I'll be okay." "Ow, I can be cold," she added. "He can't stop breathing." Something in Daniel's chest shifted. Behind him, someone's voice spoke again. "Sir, it's just a story. People say anything these days," another voice added. Daniel didn't turn. He looked at the coat, at the child standing in front of him, small, steady, and carrying something far too heavy for her age. Daniel exhaled slowly, the cold air filling his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't move. He just stood there holding a hospital bill that didn't belong to him. Facing a child who wasn't asking for pity, only a chance. And something deep beneath everything he thought he understood began to change. Daniel folded the hospital bill carefully. Not the way someone handles paper, but the way someone handles something that matters, and held it between his fingers for a second longer than necessary. Then he looked at Annie. "How far is the hospital?" he asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Not far," she said quickly. Almost too quickly, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she didn't answer fast enough. It's 3 blocks that way. St. Mary's." Daniel nodded once. He glanced down at the coat again, then back at her. "I'll buy it," he said. Relief flickered across her face, small but unmistakable. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Daniel reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and this time he didn't hesitate. He took out a bill more than 20, and placed it gently on the table. Annie looked down at it, then back up at him. "This is too much," she said. "Keep it," he replied. "For your brother." She hesitated, then nodded, carefully picking up the money as if it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Daniel took the coat, folding it over his arm again, but something about the exchange felt unfinished. He glanced toward the direction she had pointed. "Let's go," he said. Annie blinked. "Sir, I want to see the hospital," he said. "Show me." For a moment, she just stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. Then she nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." They stepped away from the table together. Behind them, the voices resumed. "Well, guess that worked. Lucky kid." Daniel didn't turn around. He walked beside Annie in silence as they moved through the crowded sidewalk. Her steps were small but quick, almost hurried, as if she were afraid. Time itself was chasing them. Daniel adjusted his pace without thinking, matching her rhythm. "Does your mother know you're out here?" he asked after a moment. Annie shook her head. "No, sir." "And you came alone?" "Yes, sir." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. "That's dangerous." She didn't respond right away. "I had to try," she said finally. They crossed an intersection, the traffic light blinking down its final seconds. A taxi honked impatiently somewhere behind them. Annie didn't flinch. Her focus stayed forward. Daniel watched her for a moment. "You said your brother needs surgery today," he said. "Do you know what kind?" She nodded. "His heart," she said. "Mama said it's something he was born with. It makes him tired. Sometimes he can't breathe right." Daniel felt the weight of that sentence settle deeper than he expected. "And they won't do it without payment?" "No, sir." "Did anyone explain why?" "They said." She hesitated, trying to recall the exact words. "They said they need to make sure the hospital can keep helping people." Daniel let out a quiet breath. "That's one way to say it," he murmured. They turned the corner and the hospital came into view. St. Mary's Children's Hospital. The building stood tall and clean against the gray sky, its glass doors reflecting the movement of the street, like a barrier between two different worlds. Annie slowed slightly. "That's it," she said. Daniel looked up at the building, then down at her. "Have you eaten today?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "No, sir." "When was the last time you ate?" She thought for a moment. "Yesterday." Daniel nodded once, filing that away silently. "All right," he said. "Well, take care of that, too." Annie looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. "You already bought the coat," she said. Daniel glanced down at it briefly, then back at her. "This stopped being about the coat a while ago," he said. She didn't fully understand, but she didn't argue either. They walked through the hospital doors. The warmth hit them immediately along with the sterile scent of disinfectant and the quiet hum of machines. The lobby was busy, but controlled, nurses moving quickly. Families sitting in rows of chairs. Voices kept low as if respect for the space demanded it. Annie's posture changed the moment they stepped inside. She moved faster now, weaving through the space with familiarity, heading straight toward the elevators. Daniel followed. "Third floor," she said, pressing the button with a small hand. The elevator doors closed, sealing them into a quiet space. For the first time since they met, Annie's shoulders dropped slightly. Daniel noticed. "You've been doing this alone?" he asked. She nodded. "For how long?" She looked down at her shoes. "A few days." Daniel didn't respond. The elevator doors opened. They stepped out into a quieter hallway. The sounds here were softer monitors, beeping, distant voices, the occasional murmur of a nurse passing by. Annie led the way without hesitation. They reached a room near the end of the corridor. She stopped at the door, then looked up at Daniel. "My mama's inside," she said. Daniel gave a small nod. "Go ahead," he said. Annie pushed the door open gently. Inside, a woman sat slumped in a chair beside a hospital bed, her head resting against the side, asleep from exhaustion. On the bed lay a small boy, wires and monitors attached to his fragile body, his breathing uneven but steady. Daniel stepped inside slowly. The room was quiet, heavy with something unspoken. Annie moved to the bedside immediately, her small hand reaching for her brother's. "I'm back," she whispered. "If this story touched your heart, please like this video. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of hope, justice, and compassion." The boy didn't wake, but his breathing shifted slightly as if he recognized her presence. Daniel stood near the door, watching. A child tried to sell her coat to support her younger brother. Daniel looked down at the folded hospital bill still in his hand, then at the boy, then at Annie. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after Annie whispered to her brother. Daniel didn't move right away. He stood just inside the doorway, as if crossing any further into the room required more than a simple step. The soft beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady but fragile, like it was holding something together that could fall apart at any second. Annie kept her hand wrapped around No's smaller one. "I sold the coat," she murmured gently, leaning closer to him. "So, you're going to be okay." The boy didn't wake, but his fingers twitched faintly in hers. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen hospital rooms before, charity events, ribbon cutings, carefully arranged tours where everything looked clean, controlled, and distant. But this wasn't staged. There were no cameras here, no speeches, no applause, just a family at the edge of something they couldn't control. The woman in the chair stirred, her eyes opened slowly, disoriented at first, then suddenly alert as she noticed Annie. "Annie," she said, her voice from exhaustion. Where did you go?" Annie turned quickly. "I went outside," she said. I was trying to help." The woman pushed herself upright, worry flashing across her face as she reached for Annie. "You can't just leave like that," she said, pulling her close. "Do you know how dangerous that is?" "I know," Annie whispered. "But Mama, I sold my coat." The woman froze. "You what?" she asked, softly, pulling back to look at her. "I sold it," Annie repeated, then hesitated before adding, "He helped me." She turned slightly, finally gesturing toward Daniel. For the first time, the woman noticed him. She straightened instinctively, her posture shifting from exhaustion to guarded politeness. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't realize." "It's all right," Daniel replied, his voice calm, measured. "You don't need to apologize." She looked between him and Annie, confusion and concern mixing in her expression. "You bought her coat?" she asked. Daniel nodded once. "Yes." The woman exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders, though not all of it. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel glanced briefly at Annie, then at Noah in the bed. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose I didn't." There was a pause, the kind that carried more meaning than words. The woman stepped closer to the bed, adjusting Noah's blanket gently, her hands moving with the familiarity of someone who hadn't left his side for days. "They said, the surgery has to happen soon," she said, her voice lower now. But she stopped, swallowing the rest. Daniel already knew the rest. "I saw the bill," he said. She looked at him sharply. Annie's eyes widened slightly. "I didn't show him," Annie said quickly. "It fell out." The woman closed her eyes for a brief second, then nodded. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. "It's not like we can hide it." Daniel stepped further into the room now, closing the distance just enough to feel part of it. "How long has he been waiting?" he asked. "Too long," she answered. "They scheduled the surgery 3 days ago, but when we couldn't make the payment," her voice faltered. "They pushed us back, said we'd lose the slot." Daniel looked at Noah again. The boy was small, too small to be carrying something like this. "And today?" Daniel asked. "They said, today is the last chance," she said. "If we don't confirm payment." She didn't finish. "She didn't have to." Daniel nodded slowly. Behind him, footsteps passed in the hallway. A nurse's voice called out softly to someone. Life continued just outside the door, unaware of the weight inside this room. Annie tugged lightly at her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she said, "he gave me money." The woman looked down at her. "What do you mean?" Annie carefully reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded bills Daniel had given her. Her mother stared at them, then back at Daniel. "This is," she began, her voice uncertain. "This is too much for a coat." Daniel didn't respond immediately. "It wasn't about the coat," he said. Finally, the woman studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand what that meant. "You don't know us," she said. "No," Daniel admitted. "And yet you're here," she added. Daniel glanced at Annie, then back at her. "Yes," he said simply. Another silence settled, but this one felt different, less uncertain, more fragile. The woman took a slow breath. "My name is Lillian," she said. "Lillian Johnson." "Daniel Carter," he replied. Her eyes flickered slightly at the name just for a moment, but she didn't react beyond that. "Well, Mr. Carter," she said quietly. "Whatever your reason is, thank you." Daniel inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the gratitude without stepping into it. A nurse entered the room then, clipboard in hand, her expression professional but tired. "Mrs. Johnson," she said. "Yes, we need to confirm your payment status within the hour," the nurse explained. "Otherwise, we'll have to release the operating room." The words landed like a quiet verdict. Lillian nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the bed. "I understand," she said. The nurse glanced briefly at Daniel, then back at Lillian as if noting the unfamiliar presence, but choosing not to question. "I'll come back shortly," she added before leaving. The door closed again. Annie looked up at Daniel. "Is this enough?" she asked, her small voice, careful, hopeful. Daniel looked at the money in Lillian's hand. Then at the bill, then at Noah. "No," he said. The word was gentle but certain. Annie's face fell slightly. Lillian lowered her gaze as if she had expected that answer all along. Daniel took a step forward. "But it doesn't need to be," he added. Both of them looked up. He reached into his coat pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. "I'm going to take care of this," he said. Lillian's eyes widened. "No," she said quickly. You've already done enough. I can't ask you for more. You didn't ask, Daniel replied. That doesn't make it right, she said. Daniel met her gaze steadily. Letting him go without surgery wouldn't be right either. The words hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Annie looked between them, her small hands tightening at her sides. Daniel unlocked his phone, already dialing. This is Daniel Carter, he said when the call connected, his tone shifting firmer now. Precise. I need billing authorization at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Immediately, Lillian stared at him, realization slowly dawning. Annie didn't understand the details, but she understood one thing. For the first time since they had walked into that hospital, time didn't feel like it was running out anymore. The hospital lobby hummed softly with the quiet energy of a place used to urgency. But for Daniel, every sound seemed sharper, more present. He walked alongside Lillian and Annie toward the billing office, the folded bills still in her hand, and the hospital paperwork now secured in his own. Daniel's mind was unusually restless, cycling through numbers, possibilities, and what ifs with a speed that surprised him. For someone who had spent a career avoiding messes like this, the stakes here felt undeniable, personal. He had never seen fear like Annie's before. That calm desperation that wasn't asking for pity, only for a chance, and it lodged itself in his chest, refusing to be ignored. Mr. Carter, Lillian said quietly. You really don't have to. Daniel held up a hand. I know, he said. But I do. He doesn't have time for hesitation. Annie glanced up at him, her small eyes wide. You really mean it? I mean it, Daniel replied. He glanced around, noting the nurses moving between patients, the hospital staff typing on keyboards. The quiet footsteps of other parents and children were going to get him scheduled right now. No delays. The trio entered the billing office, a small room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A clerk looked up from behind the desk, adjusting her glasses in mild surprise at the unexpected visitor. Yes, she said. How can I help you? Daniel approached the desk and held out the hospital bill. This is Noah Johnson. I need to cover the balance immediately and confirm his surgery for today. The clerk glanced at the paper, frowning briefly as she typed. It's quite unusual to have a payment authorization like this walk in directly, sir. I'm not here to follow the usual, Daniel said. His voice was firm, direct, the kind that made people stop doubting and start acting. We don't have time. Annie shifted behind him, tugging slightly at his coat sleeve. He'll be okay, she whispered. Daniel bent down just enough to meet her gaze. He's going to be okay, he said. You did the right thing. You were brave. Annie smiled faintly, her small shoulders rising in relief. She looked toward Lillian, who nodded encouragingly, her own worry etched deeply in her expression. Tempered now with a trace of hope, the clerk pressed a few keys, her expression shifting as confirmation appeared on her screen. Payment received, surgery confirmed for today. Room assigned, doctor notified. Daniel exhaled, the tension in his shoulders releasing fractionally. Thank you, he said. This matters more than you can imagine. Annie's fingers clutched his coat sleeve. Mama said he might not make it if we couldn't pay today. Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the hum of the office, but it carried enough weight to reach Daniel entirely. Daniel's throat tightened. He had seen failure. He had seen numbers, but he had rarely seen a child carry so much responsibility without crumbling under it. He wanted to say something grand, something comforting, but all he managed was a quiet. He's going to be fine. You did that. Lillian leaned toward him. I don't know how to thank you enough. She paused, searching for the right words. You've done more than anyone has in days. Daniel shook his head, a small, controlled motion. I didn't do this alone. She did her part. She showed courage. You all helped each other. He gestured subtly to Annie. This little one reminded me what matters. Annie's small hands still clutched the folded bills tightly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. I just wanted him to live. Daniel knelt slightly to her level. And he will, because you didn't give up. The clerk handed Lillian a confirmation slip. Here, this is everything documented. Surgery is scheduled for 2 p.m. He'll be prepped in the recovery area shortly. Lillian exhaled deeply, her hand briefly, squeezing Annie's shoulder. You hear that, Annie? It's really happening. The little girl nodded slowly, her tiny body still tense from the worry of the morning. Daniel could feel the weight of it as clearly as if it were his own. He reached down and gently took the coat from Annie's hands. Here, he said. Keep it, even if you sold it for a moment. This is yours to hold on to. Annie shook her head. I can't, she said softly. I need to sell it. He needs the money more than I need to stay warm. Daniel studied her for a long moment. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't protesting. She was stating a fact. Her brother's life had become her only concern. The coat, the cold, all of it was secondary. He realized in that instant that a child had more bravery than most adults he knew. Annie, he said gently. Sometimes what matters most doesn't cost money. It's the courage you show. Today, that courage yours made a difference. Her small face lifted to his. Really? She whispered. Yes, Daniel said. Really? The sound of a nurse's voice calling for Noah echoed faintly down the corridor. Daniel glanced toward the door, then back at Lillian. You should go. He's ready now. Lillian nodded, gathering herself and taking Annie's hand in hers. They moved quickly toward the elevator, leaving Daniel standing there, the coat still in his hands, the morning light reflecting faintly off the hospital's glass doors. He watched them go, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease settling into him. The market noise, the city outside, all felt distant, irrelevant. Here in this hospital, time was measured differently. Moments mattered because they could mean life or death. Decisions carried weight he had long avoided. Daniel took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, feeling the unfamiliar stirrings of responsibility he couldn't easily shrug off. A small part of him, one he had ignored for decades, had been awakened, and he wasn't sure he wanted it to go back to sleep. As the elevator doors closed for Lillian and Annie, Daniel unfolded the hospital bill once more. Every name, every number, every word on the paper now had meaning beyond arithmetic. It was a child's life balanced against indifference, against systems that often overlooked the most vulnerable. And in that quiet hospital hallway, Daniel realized that helping one family today might be the beginning, not the end of something he had long ignored. The consequences of power, responsibility, and the fragile threads that connect us all. He walked to the side of the lobby, standing beneath the winter sunlight streaming through the glass, thinking of Annie, thinking of Noah, thinking of how close the line between hope and despair could be. The coat still rested over his arm, but its warmth now felt different. Not fabric against flesh, but the warmth of action, of purpose. Daniel Carter made a small decision then, one that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He would follow through. He would see this through, not because it was required, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time that day, he felt a quiet clarity. The city outside moved on, indifferent as ever. But within these walls, a child's courage had rewritten the rules of engagement. Daniel tucked the hospital bill into his coat pocket and allowed himself a glance toward the elevators where Lillian and Annie had disappeared. And for the first time, he wondered what else he could do to ensure that courage was never wasted. Daniel waited in the hospital lobby, the sunlight cutting through the large glass windows and painting streaks of gold across the sterile floor. He could hear the soft murmur of nurses moving between rooms, the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes against linoleum, and the steady beeping of monitors drifting from the children's ward behind the doors. His mind, however, wasn't on the sounds or even the light. It was on Annie and her brother. He replayed the morning in his head. Her courage, the way she had clutched that coat, how carefully she had unfolded the hospital bill when it had fallen from the lining. Every detail etched itself deeper into his consciousness, reminding him that the stakes weren't abstract. They were real and fragile and human. When the elevator doors finally opened and Annie and Lillian stepped out, Daniel rose to meet them halfway. Annie's face was pale, still flushed from the morning cold, and her small hands gripped Lillian's tightly. Noah's bed was being wheeled past. His body swaddled in layers, monitors beeping steadily. He slept, but Daniel could see the tension in his tiny shoulders. The small rise and fall of his chest uneven yet steady. He's stable, Lillian whispered, her eyes scanning the monitors. They're taking him to pre-op now. We have just enough time. She gave Daniel a fleeting glance, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I still can't believe you did all this. Just like that. Daniel shook his head slightly. It wasn't just like that. It's obvious what needed to be done. His voice was quieter than usual, almost reflective. Someone had to step in. Annie looked up at him, her small face serious. You really think he'll be okay? Yes, Daniel replied firmly. He's in good hands now. That's all that matters. She nodded but didn't speak, her eyes following the wheeled bed as it disappeared into the pre-op corridor. Daniel watched her a moment longer, noticing the way she straightened, how she took a deep breath as if preparing herself for what might come next. Then she looked back at him. Sir, she said softly. Can you stay? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Stay. Yes, she whispered. Just until he's done. I don't want to be alone. For a moment, he hesitated. He wasn't accustomed to staying in waiting rooms for children. He wasn't accustomed to feeling responsibility in this way. But looking at Annie at the courage that radiated despite her small size and the weight she bore, he realized this was exactly what was required. All right, he said. Finally, I'll stay. They settled into the chairs. Near the window, Daniel tried not to draw attention, sitting slightly apart from Lillian and Annie, but close enough that she could see him. Annie folded the coat carefully on her lap, brushing her fingers over the worn fabric as if it were a talisman. Daniel watched her, feeling an unfamiliar mixture of respect and protectiveness. Minutes passed slowly. The sunlight shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor. Daniel noticed families in similar situations. Some laughing quietly, some silent, others tense with worry. Each child, each parent carried a story, a weight, a hope. He had lived most of his life insulated from such raw necessity. And yet here it was, pressing close and unavoidable. Annie broke the silence first. "Sir, why do you help us?" Daniel looked at her, not immediately answering. He had never been asked such a question so plainly, so directly, by someone who carried so little armor against the world. "Because," he said finally, "sometimes it matters more to act than to wait for someone else to act. You were doing everything you could. I just made sure it counted." Annie considered this, her small brows furrowed. "Does that happen often?" "No," Daniel admitted. "Not often enough." She nodded, accepting the answer, her gaze returning to the coat. Her fingers traced the seams, worn but intact, as if checking to see whether it could still hold warmth. Daniel observed the small gestures, the careful folding, the protective touch over the money she had received, and realized that this child had learned responsibility in a way few adults ever did. Lillian shifted, clearing her throat. "He's going to be okay," she said softly. "I just thank you for being here. It matters to them. More than you can know." Daniel nodded again, keeping his tone even. "It matters to me as well. That's why I'm here." The minutes continued to pass, marked by the occasional murmur of nurses or the soft buzz of the intercom announcing a staff member. Daniel's attention wandered to the paperwork in his hand, and the hospital bill he had picked up outside. Even now, seeing the numbers on the page made his chest tighten. 4-year-old Noah, with a congenital heart defect, pending surgery, all measured in numbers and deadlines. It seemed absurd, the fragility of life reduced to columns of figures until you looked at the child and the child's sister and the mother who had not slept for days. Annie shifted on her chair. "Sir, will my mama be okay, too?" Daniel looked at her carefully. "She's strong," he said. "She's already done more than most adults could, but she'll be tired after this. You can help her by being brave." She nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the responsibility she already carried. Daniel felt a pang of admiration and sorrow simultaneously. Here was a child shouldering a burden far beyond her years, and yet somehow standing, unbroken. A nurse appeared at the door of the pre-op wing and motioned toward Lillian. "We're ready for him now," she said gently. "If you'd like to follow." Lillian looked at Annie, her eyes soft. "Do you want to go with him?" Annie hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Daniel stood beside her. "I'll come, too," he said, surprising himself more than anyone else. The three of them followed the nurse down the corridor, Daniel walking slightly behind to give them space, but close enough to intervene if necessary. The hallways were quiet, a different rhythm than the bustling lobby, more controlled, more urgent. He noticed the efficiency, the calm under pressure, the way everyone knew exactly what to do, but also the way each child in the pre-op area seemed fragile, delicate, dependent. Annie's small hand squeezed Lillian's, then brushed against Daniel's coat as she passed him. He felt a shiver run through him, not from the cold, but from the realization of how real this moment was, how immediate the consequences. He had helped her get this far, but there was still the unknown ahead. Inside the pre-op room, the team was ready. Nurses and technicians moved with purpose, preparing Noah for surgery. Lillian leaned over him, smoothing his blanket, whispering reassurances that Daniel could not hear, but could feel. Annie remained at the bedside, clutching the coat lightly, tracing the seams absent-mindedly. Daniel stayed near the door, observing, waiting. Noah's small eyes fluttered open briefly, recognizing his sister and mother. A faint smile passed across his lips, tiny but unmistakable. Annie's hand moved to cover his, brushing the edge of his blanket to provide warmth. Daniel watched the interaction, the simple gestures, and felt a knot in his chest loosen slightly. For all the worry, for all the urgency, for all the uncertainty, there was life here, moving and breathing and fighting in its own quiet way. The anesthesiologist approached Lillian, quietly explaining the next steps. Daniel could see the subtle tension ease from her shoulders, though it remained just beneath the surface. Annie looked up at him, her small eyes wide. "He'll be okay now, right?" Daniel nodded. "He will, and he's going to have people looking after him the whole time. You did your part, Annie. You showed him courage, and now it's time to let others do theirs." Annie looked down at the coat again, her fingers brushing over it. I hope it's enough," she whispered. "It is," Daniel said firmly. "And more than enough." Outside the pre-op room, the hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant voices of nurses. Daniel stepped back slightly, letting Lillian and Annie move closer to Noah, but he stayed nearby, a presence that didn't intrude, but that mattered. A silent witness to the courage of a child and the fragility of life balanced on hope and action. Time passed slowly, measured by footsteps, monitors, and the rhythm of controlled breaths. Daniel remained standing, feeling the weight of the morning, the coat, the hospital bill, the child's determination, and the small thread of human connection that had drawn him into something far beyond his usual calculations. He realized that decisions like these weren't about numbers or schedules, but about life itself, fragile and unpredictable, and the responsibility one could not ignore. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Carter felt completely, undeniably awake. The waiting room seemed to stretch endlessly, every tick of the clock amplifying the tension that Daniel felt deep in his chest. He stood near the window, watching sunlight drift across the sterile floor, catching reflections off the polished metal rails and the glimmering glass doors. Even in a hospital designed for efficiency, life remained unpredictable, an invisible thread connecting the patients, the parents, and the staff. Daniel's gaze kept returning to Annie, who sat close to her mother, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, the coat still resting on her knees as if it were the only tangible anchor. In her storm of worry, Annie glanced up at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and lingering fear. "Sir, do you think he'll be okay when they put him under?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, tentative, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace in the room. Daniel crouched slightly to meet her level, his hand resting lightly on the chair next to hers without touching. "He will," he said, his tone steady, meant to carry certainty into the words she needed to hear. "The doctors here, they know exactly what they're doing. And you've already done the hardest part. You got him the chance to have this surgery." Annie nodded, but her eyes betrayed the tension she had been holding for hours. She hugged the coat a little tighter, the fabric warm beneath her fingers, the folds carrying the faint scent of the market, of winter, and of the small life she had been fighting to save. Daniel could see the weight of responsibility she bore, a weight no child should ever carry, and it pulled at something deep inside him. The door opened quietly, and a nurse stepped in, her face professional yet kind. "Mr. Carter," she said, looking to Daniel, "we're ready to prep Noah. You and Mrs. Johnson can follow him to pre-op." Lillian Johnson's face tightened with tension, but there was a flash of relief in her eyes. "We should go," she said, taking Annie's hand gently. Daniel stepped closer. "I'll come with you," he said, surprising even himself. It wasn't something he normally did, stand in hospital corridors, accompany a child and her family. But something about this situation, about Annie and her bravery, compelled him forward. As they moved down the corridor, Annie's small hand stayed tucked into her mother's while she brushed her fingers along Daniel's coat with occasional glances up at him, seeking reassurance. The hospital was quieter here, the sounds of distant monitors and hushed voices blending with the faint hum of the heating system. Each step Daniel took felt purposeful, a silent acknowledgement of the responsibility he had taken on. They reached the pre-op area, a room designed for precision, calm, and efficiency. Nurses and technicians moved with practiced ease, preparing Noah for surgery. The boy lay on the stretcher, wires attached, eyes closed, breathing steady but shallow. Annie immediately leaned closer, her hand brushing his tiny fingers. Daniel stayed slightly behind, observing, careful not to intrude, but close enough to intervene if necessary. "Annie," Lillian whispered, adjusting Noah's blanket. "You've been so brave." Annie shook her head. "I had to try, I couldn't just wait." Daniel nodded, stepping slightly closer. "Sometimes the smallest actions carry the most weight. You showed courage today, that's what matters." Annie looked up at him uncertain. "Even if I can't do anything else?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Even then, courage matters as much as anything else here." A doctor entered, reviewing charts quickly before kneeling near Noah. "Hello, little one," she said gently. "We're going to help you feel better now." She glanced at Daniel and Lillian. "All set to prep for surgery?" "Yes," Lillian said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The medical team began working efficiently, wrapping Noah in sterile sheets, attaching monitoring equipment, and confirming vitals. Annie watched intently, her small fingers clutching the coat, her eyes wide with worry and hope. Daniel could see every tiny change in her expression, the furrowed brow, the tight grip on her brother's hand, the subtle inhale and exhale that belied the fear she carried inside. Daniel felt a quiet shift in himself as he observed. This was far from the controlled environments he was used to, the boardrooms, the offices, the meetings where outcomes were predictable and consequences calculable. Here, every decision, every move mattered in a way numbers and reports never could. He had stepped into something larger than himself, something real, immediate, and human. Annie whispered, "Sir, will it hurt him?" Daniel crouched again, closer to her height. "They'll make sure he doesn't feel anything. He'll be asleep, and when he wakes up, he'll be safe. That's all that matters." She nodded slowly, her hands tightening on the coat. Daniel noticed her posture shift slightly, the small curve of her shoulders straightening. She was bracing herself, preparing to let go of control she had carried all morning. The anesthesiologist approached a calm presence with soft, deliberate movements. "We're ready," she said. "Parents may stand here for a moment while we begin. Then we'll have a nurse take him into the operating room." Lillian moved closer, holding Annie's hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's going to be fine." Annie's eyes flicked to Daniel. "Will you stay?" "I'll be nearby," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The team gently transferred Noah onto the operating table, and Annie's small hands lingered briefly on the blanket, tracing the outline of his arm as if committing it to memory. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. This was the fragility of life, the weight of hope carried by a child's small shoulders. He reached out subtly, resting a hand near hers, not touching, just present. "Everything's going to be fine," Daniel said softly. "You've done your part. Now it's their turn." Annie nodded, taking a deep, steadying breath. She whispered almost to herself. "I hope it's enough." Daniel glanced at the surgical team, who moved with deliberate calm and then back at Annie. "It is," he said firmly. "It's more than enough." The nurses began administering anesthesia, the soft hum of machinery filling the room. Noah's breathing became slower, steady, peaceful. Annie's fingers stayed lightly on his hand until he was fully asleep. Lillian gave a deep sigh, leaning against the edge of the bed for support. "Thank you," she whispered to Daniel, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than anyone could have expected." Daniel shook his head lightly. "No," he said quietly. "Annie did it. You all did it. I just made sure it counted." Annie leaned against her mother. The coat still folded carefully on her lap. Her eyes were heavy, her energy spent from the tension of the morning. Daniel studied her, seeing the quiet strength that had carried her this far. A child's courage, small yet fierce, had shaped the day. The surgical team finished their preparations and wheeled Noah toward the operating room. Annie followed, her small steps hurried, careful. Daniel stayed just behind, watching every movement, aware that once the doors closed, the waiting would begin. And that waiting carried its own weight, its own tension, its own quiet test of courage. Outside the operating room, Daniel stood near the hallway, watching Annie and Lillian settle into a small seating area provided for families. He adjusted the coat over his arm, its warmth now feeling less like a physical barrier and more like a symbol of care, of responsibility, of the small courage that had started everything. Minutes stretched, each one heavy with uncertainty. Daniel thought about the morning, about the market, about the coat, about the bill, and about the child who had moved him in ways he hadn't expected. Every detail felt heightened, sharper, more real. He realized that actions, even small ones, rippled far beyond immediate sight. One child's determination had set a chain in motion, and he had stepped into the current. He exhaled slowly and took a seat nearby, keeping his eyes on Annie, ensuring she was not alone. The warmth of the coat remained across his arm, a quiet reassurance. For the first time that day, Daniel felt fully present, fully aware of how fragile life could be and how powerful the courage of a child could become when recognized, respected, and supported. The operating room doors closed with a quiet click, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway with Annie and Lillian seated nearby. The antiseptic smell of the hospital still lingered in the air, and the low hum of the monitors from the pre-op area had faded, leaving only the muffled sounds of footsteps and distant voices. Daniel watched Annie as she fiddled with the coat on her lap, her small fingers smoothing the fabric, tracing worn seams that now seemed symbolic of the courage she had shown that morning. She wasn't fidgeting in panic, but there was a tension in her shoulders. A quiet bracing for the unknown. Daniel found himself shifting in his seat, uncomfortable in a way he hadn't expected. This was a world that had no formulas, no spreadsheets, no margins of error. Here, each heartbeat, each breath mattered far more than any number he had ever calculated. Annie looked up at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Sir, will he be scared?" Daniel considered the question carefully, leaning back slightly. "Maybe," he said finally. "But doctors and nurses know how to make sure he's safe. He'll be asleep, and when he wakes up, he'll be okay." She nodded, then glanced down at the coat again, as if seeking reassurance from its worn fabric. Daniel's gaze followed her movements. He realized that to Annie, the coat was more than warmth. It was a symbol, a connection between her courage and her brother's survival. That understanding made the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The hallway remained quiet for a while, punctuated only by the occasional distant announcement over the intercom and the soft shuffle of shoes on linoleum. Daniel leaned back against the wall, letting his eyes wander across the corridor, watching other families, other children. Each carried their own quiet battles, their own fears and hopes. He had spent a life insulated from such raw immediate stakes, and now he felt the full weight of their reality pressing against him. Lillian leaned toward Annie, speaking softly, her voice gentle but steady. "He'll be fine. You've done everything you could. Now it's their turn to take care of him." Annie glanced up at Daniel. "Even if I can't do anything else." "Yes," he said firmly. "Even then, courage is enough. Courage and love it carries a lot farther than money ever could." The small words seemed to settle over Annie, and for a moment, her tiny shoulders relaxed. Daniel observed her closely, noting how a child so young could bear such responsibility without crumbling, how her bravery had compelled him, a grown man accustomed to control, into a new awareness of what really mattered. A nurse appeared at the end of the hall, motioning toward the pre-op room. "Ready for Noah now," she said gently. "You may follow." Lillian's face tensed, but she nodded, gripping Annie's hand. Daniel moved closer, his presence steady and calm. "We'll go together," he said. The three of them followed the nurse down the corridor. The hallways were quieter here. The energy more deliberate, purposeful. Daniel's usual world of deals and schedules seemed distant and irrelevant. Each step forward was a step into something immediate, human, and unavoidable. Inside the pre-op room, the team was prepared. Monitors, sterile sheets, and machines surrounded Noah, who lay quietly, fragile, but breathing steadily. Annie moved to the bedside immediately, her hand brushing his, grounding him, grounding herself. Daniel remained near the door, observing, careful not to intrude, but close enough to intervene if necessary. "Annie," Lillian whispered, adjusting the blanket around Noah. "You've been so brave today." Annie shook her head. "I had to try, I couldn't just wait." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes the smallest actions carry the most weight. You've shown courage, and that's enough for now." Annie's eyes flicked to him. "Really?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Really. Courage matters as much as anything else here." The anesthesiologist entered, calm and deliberate. "We're ready," she said. "Parents may stay for a moment while we begin the preparations. Then a nurse will accompany him to the operating room." Lillian stepped closer to the bed. "Do you want to stay near him?" she asked Annie. Annie nodded slowly. Daniel stayed slightly back, a silent protector. The anesthesiologist and nurses began their work, attaching monitors, checking vitals, explaining procedures in a voice that was both technical and gentle. Annie's hands clutched the coat tightly as her eyes followed every movement. Daniel felt the magnitude of the moment pressing on him. Life fragile and unguarded lay before him and every decision mattered. He had intervened, yes, but now he was witnessing the consequences of choices that no spreadsheet or meeting could ever represent. "Sir," Annie whispered, "will he feel anything?" Daniel crouched slightly. "No, he'll be asleep, and when he wakes up, he'll be safe." "That's what matters." She nodded, releasing a breath she had been holding. Her tiny fingers smoothed the coat once more, tracing the worn seams, a tactile reminder of what she had done to bring him here. The surgical team finished preparations and wheeled Noah into the operating room. Annie leaned over, brushing his hand lightly, whispering a quiet goodbye. Daniel remained nearby, a silent presence as the doors closed behind him. The waiting had begun, but now it carried its own tension, its own weight, its own test of patience and courage. Outside, the hallway was quiet, except for distant footsteps and soft mechanical hums. Daniel adjusted the coat over his arm, feeling its warmth as a symbol, not just of physical protection, but of the courage and connection that had carried them this far. Every number on the hospital bill, every sleepless night, every risk Annie had taken now coalesced into something tangible. Hope. He looked at Annie, sitting beside her mother, her eyes reflecting worry and anticipation, and felt the unfamiliar, humbling weight of responsibility. This was a lesson in life. He realized one that couldn't be calculated, one that couldn't be managed by meetings or reports. The courage of a child, the love of a mother, and the weight of decision could shift the balance of a life in ways he had never fully understood until now. Daniel exhaled, letting the tension drain slowly from his shoulders. He remained there, a quiet observer, a steady presence, understanding finally that some decisions mattered, not because of the money, not because of obligation, but because they were the only right thing to do. The city outside moved on, indifferent and unyielding. But within the hospital walls, life's fragile pulse had reminded him with remarkable clarity of what it truly meant to act, to care, and to witness courage when it revealed itself in its smallest, fiercest form. And as the minutes ticked forward, Daniel Carter remained in that quiet space, watching, feeling, and learning from a child's bravery. A mother's love and a brother's fight. A reminder that even in the most sterile and controlled environments, humanity, courage, and hope were the most powerful forces of all. The minutes stretched slowly in the waiting room, each one feeling heavier than the last. Daniel Carter remained seated near the large windows, sunlight cutting through in streaks across the floor, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the hospital furniture. His gaze kept drifting toward Annie, who sat beside her mother, her small hands gripping the coat on her lap. Every so often, she would smooth the worn fabric, as if the simple act could somehow anchor her in a world that felt unpredictable and frightening. Daniel had witnessed courage before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in calculated risks that carried the weight of millions of dollars, but nothing like this. This was pure, raw, unshielded courage, the kind that belonged to the vulnerable, the innocent, the powerless. Annie looked up at him suddenly, her small voice breaking the quiet hum of the hallway. "Sir, do you think he'll be okay?" Daniel adjusted in his chair, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "Yes," he said firmly. "He's in the best hands." The doctors know exactly what they're doing. Annie nodded, but didn't speak further. Her eyes kept flicking toward the operating room doors, watching as other patients were wheeled in and out. Every movement a reminder of the uncertainty that surrounded them. Daniel could feel her tension, the tiny tremor of worry held tightly in place by the coat folded across her lap. A nurse passed by, giving him a polite nod. "Family waiting?" she asked softly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "We're waiting for one of the patients in pre-op." The nurse's eyes lingered briefly on Annie, noting the girl's small size and the quiet composure she held. Then she moved along, her presence of fleeting reassurance that the staff was aware and attentive. Daniel exhaled slowly. This waiting, the uncertainty, the potential for heartbreak was unlike any business negotiation or strategic decision he had ever faced. Here each moment mattered in ways that were irreversible. Annie shifted slightly in her chair. "Sir, what happens if something goes wrong?" Daniel leaned back, considering the question carefully. "If something goes wrong," he said slowly, "the doctors and nurses will do everything in their power to fix it. That's their job. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay calm and let them work. You've already done your part." She nodded again, folding her hands over the coat. I want him to be okay." "I know," Daniel said. "And he will be. That's why we're here. That's why you did what you did. You gave him a chance. Now it's time to trust others to help." The corridor remained quiet except for the distant hum of machinery and the faint shuffle of shoes on the floor. Daniel's attention drifted to the other families in the waiting area, noticing the same mixture of hope and anxiety etched into their faces. Children held tightly by parents, mothers gripping paperwork, fathers standing silently nearby, everyone waiting, bracing, hoping. He realized that all the wealth in the world couldn't guarantee outcomes here. All it could do was provide access, opportunity, a chance for courage, and hope to meet preparation. Annie's small voice broke through his reverie. "Sir, do you think Mama will be okay while we wait?" "She's strong," Daniel said, nodding toward Lillian. "She's done more than anyone could ask of her, but she'll need your help, too. Your presence, your calm. That's important for her and for your brother." Annie glanced down at the coat again, running her fingers along its worn fabric. "I hope it's enough," she whispered. Daniel shook his head slightly, crouching to her level. "It is enough. More than enough." At that moment, the operating room doors opened and a nurse emerged, gesturing for Lillian and Annie to follow. Daniel rose immediately. "Shall we?" he asked. Annie looked up at him. "You'll come?" "Yes," he said. "I'm not leaving." They followed the nurse down the corridor, Daniel walking just behind them, providing a sense of security without intruding. The hallways here were quieter, more controlled, with an urgency to every step, a precision to every movement. Daniel noticed the efficiency of the staff, the way everyone knew exactly what to do, but also the subtle human touches, the small smiles, the gentle reassurances, the quiet attentiveness to the children's fears. Inside the pre-op room, Noah lay on the stretcher, small and fragile, wires and monitors attached. Annie moved to his side immediately, brushing her fingers along his tiny hand. Daniel remained near the door, careful to give them space, but close enough to intervene if necessary. "Annie," Lillian whispered, adjusting Noah's blanket. "You've been so brave today." Annie shook her head. "I just wanted to help him," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "Sometimes helping is all that matters. Courage, love, and persistence, they carry far more than we realize." Annie's eyes met his wide and earnest. "Even if I can't do anything else." "Yes," Daniel said. "Even then, that's enough." The anesthesiologist approached, her movements deliberate, her voice soft but precise. "We're ready," she said. "Parents may stay for a moment while we prepare him. Then a nurse will take him into the operating room." Lillian gripped Annie's hand tightly. "Do you want to stay close?" she asked. Annie nodded, and Daniel stayed slightly back, a silent presence. The medical team worked efficiently, attaching monitors, checking vitals, ensuring Noah was ready. Annie's small hands held the coat tightly, her eyes following every movement, her expression tense yet resolute. "Sir," Annie whispered, "will it hurt him?" Daniel crouched slightly to her level. "No," he said. "He'll be asleep, and when he wakes up, he'll be safe. That's what matters." Annie's shoulders relaxed just a little, the weight of responsibility easing, if only slightly. She brushed the coat over her lap again, letting the worn fabric comfort her, as she had done all morning. Daniel observed her, silently, admiring her composure and bravery, recognizing that a child's courage could shape events in ways that far exceeded his own expectations. The team finished preparing Noah, wheeling him toward the operating room. Annie leaned forward, brushing his small hand lightly, whispering a soft goodbye. Daniel remained, a steady witness, watching as the doors closed behind them. The hallway outside was still, the hum of equipment and distant footsteps, the only sounds. Daniel adjusted the coat on his arm, feeling its warmth as a tangible reminder of courage and responsibility. The weight of the morning, the market, the coat, the hospital bill, and the child's bravery had settled heavily upon him, but it also brought a clarity he had not anticipated. Here, decisions were not measured in numbers or profit, but in life itself. Minutes passed in quiet observation. Daniel noticed other families, parents whispering reassurances, children clutching blankets or toys, each carrying hope in a form as fragile as the one he had witnessed with Annie. He realized that courage, when recognized and supported, rippled outward, creating possibilities where none had seemed to exist. Annie remained near her mother, eyes occasionally drifting toward the operating room doors. Daniel watched her carefully, noting the way she straightened slightly, the subtle intake of breath, the small gestures that signaled endurance, resilience, and a determination beyond her years. He thought about how one child's bravery had forced him to act, to step beyond detachment, and how that act now allowed life to continue, tethered by hope, responsibility, and action. Time moved slowly, measured by monitors, and the rhythm of controlled breaths. Daniel remained a silent witness to a small but profound story of courage, connection, and human endurance. He understood more deeply than ever that life's most meaningful moments were rarely calculated or planned. They were carried by those willing to act, to stand, to hope, and to fight for what truly mattered. And as the minutes stretched on, Daniel Carter stayed present, fully aware that the courage of a child, the love of a mother, and the responsibility he had chosen to embrace had converged to create a possibility that might never have existed otherwise. He looked at Annie, at Lillian, at the space where life and uncertainty met, and felt a quiet certainty that the chain of action set in motion that morning would ripple far beyond the hospital walls. Shaping not just a single life, but perhaps a new understanding of responsibility, compassion, and the power of courage in the smallest hands. The hallway outside the operating room felt impossibly long, each step echoing against the sterile walls as Daniel Carter paced quietly. The coat still folded over his arm. He tried to focus on something tangible. The polished floor beneath his feet, the distant hum of hospital equipment, the flickering lights above, but his mind kept returning to Noah, fragile and dependent, and to Annie, small yet unyielding in her courage. The waiting room was now silent, aside from occasional footsteps and soft murmurs of other parents. Time moved slowly here, measured not by clocks or schedules, but by heartbeats and breaths, by uncertainty and hope, by the invisible balance between life and risk. Annie sat close to her mother, fingers fidgeting with the coat. She had been unusually quiet for a child who normally asked 1,000 questions in a day. Daniel crouched slightly beside her, careful to remain unobtrusive, but present, offering silent reassurance. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "You've carried more today than most adults ever will. That's worth more than anything else." Annie's eyes flicked up at him. "Even if I don't understand everything." "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Courage doesn't need full understanding. It just needs to exist." She nodded slowly, pressing the coat a little tighter against her lap. Daniel could see how small gestures anchored her. Her careful folding of the fabric, the subtle smoothing of the seams, the way she held it as if it could hold her brother's life in place. It struck him then that hope, bravery, and action were tangible, even when life itself felt fragile and uncertain. Lillian leaned toward Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "I still can't believe you're here doing all this. I've never met anyone who would." She faltered, searching for words that felt sufficient. "Just step in like that." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I didn't step in for praise," he said softly. "I stepped in because someone had to act. Sometimes waiting isn't an option. No matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it is." Annie watched him, her small face serious. "Sir, did you do this for other people, too?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "but not often enough." His gaze drifted toward the operating room doors, behind which Noah lay under the careful supervision of skilled hands. Today, it mattered more than anything else. Annie's fingers brushed the coat again. "I just hope it's enough," she whispered. Daniel placed a gentle hand near hers, not touching, just close enough for presence. "It's enough," he said. "More than enough. You gave him the chance. That's what matters most." The intercom crackled softly, announcing a nurse's voice, and Daniel's attention returned to the room. The minutes stretched, and he noticed the other families waiting, each carrying quiet burdens of their own. He realized how small gestures, small acts of courage, could ripple outward, creating possibilities where none seemed to exist. A nurse emerged, signaling for Lillian and Annie to follow. Daniel stood and straightened the coat on his arm. "Let's go," he said. Annie looked up at him. "You're coming?" "Yes," he said. "I'm staying." They walked together down the hallway toward the pre-op area. Daniel observed every step, the precision and efficiency of the staff, the deliberate calm of the medical team, the quiet tension in the parents' movements. Each detail, each gesture reinforced the gravity of the moment. Life depended on skill, on care, on courage, and on the presence of those willing to act. Inside the pre-op room, Noah lay on the stretcher, still and fragile, attached to monitors and Tubes. Annie moved to his side immediately, brushing her fingers along his tiny hand, while Daniel remained near the doorway, offering steady presence. Lillian adjusted the blanket around Noah, her voice soft and comforting. "You've been brave, Annie. So very brave today." Annie shook her head. "I just wanted him to live," she whispered. Daniel crouched slightly beside her. "And he will," he said. "Because of you. Courage carried him here. And now the doctors will do their part." The anesthesiologist approached calm and deliberate. "We're ready," she said. "Parents may stay briefly while we prepare him. Then a nurse will take him into the operating room." Lillian held Annie's hand tightly and Daniel stayed nearby, offering silent support. The team began their work, checking vitals, preparing Noah for anesthesia and ensuring everything was ready. Annie's hands remained on the coat, her eyes tracking every movement, absorbing each action with the intensity of someone who had already carried far too much responsibility. "Sir," Annie whispered, "will it hurt him?" "No," Daniel said gently. "He'll be asleep. He won't feel a thing. That's what matters." Annie's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension easing, though not fully gone. She smoothed the coat again over her lap, as if it could shield her brother through the fabric. Daniel watched, admiring the composure and bravery she displayed, realizing that a child's courage could shape events in ways even a lifetime of experience could not. The team completed preparations and Noah was carefully wheeled toward the operating room. Annie leaned forward, brushing his small hand lightly, whispering a quiet goodbye. Daniel remained, a steady presence, observing as the doors closed. Outside, the hallway was quiet, save for distant footsteps and the soft hum of hospital machinery. Daniel adjusted the coat over his arm, feeling its warmth as a symbol not just of protection, but of the bravery and determination that had carried them this far. The weight of the morning, the coat, the hospital bill, the market, and the child's courage had settled deeply upon him. Yet, it brought clarity. Decisions here were measured not in numbers or profit, but in life itself, and Daniel understood more clearly than ever that acting when it mattered most was the truest measure of responsibility. Time passed slowly, the waiting room now a quiet witness to hope, fear, and anticipation. Daniel kept his eyes on Annie and Lillian, noting the subtle adjustments, the careful touches, the silent reassurances exchanged between mother and daughter. Every gesture, every look carried meaning, echoing the magnitude of the moment. Daniel exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease fractionally. He had entered this morning expecting a simple interaction, a coat, some charity, perhaps a fleeting act of kindness, but what he had encountered was far more profound. A child's courage had demanded his attention, had awakened a responsibility he could not ignore, and had created a chain of actions that would ripple far beyond the sterile walls of this hospital. As he settled back into his chair, Daniel Carter remained vigilant, fully aware of the fragility of life, the bravery of the small, and the quiet, transformative power of hope. He watched the door to the operating room, knowing that each passing minute carried immense weight, but also that the courage and determination displayed today had already changed the course of more than one life. In that quiet suspended space, Daniel realized that presence, action, and attention mattered as much as skill and preparation, and that the lessons of this morning would resonate long after the monitors and machines fell silent. The waiting stretched endlessly in the quiet corner of the hospital hallway. Daniel Carter sat near the chairs where Annie and Lillian remained, his eyes fixed on the closed doors of the operating room. The minutes seemed to elongate, each second weighted with the delicate tension of life in the balance. Annie sat beside her mother, the coat folded carefully on her lap, fingers tracing the seams as if the worn fabric could somehow shield her brother, her silent courage anchoring her small frame against the storm of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. Daniel had been standing and pacing, then seated and leaning, repeatedly checking the floor, the clock, and the distant corridor. Yet no distraction could pierce the gravity of the situation. This was not a business decision, not a calculated investment. This was life itself, fragile, unpredictable, and entirely dependent on the actions of those present. Annie finally spoke, her small voice quiet but urgent. "Sir, will it hurt him?" Daniel crouched slightly, bringing himself to her level. "No," he said, "he won't feel a thing. The doctors are experts. Their job is to make sure he's safe. That's all that matters right now." Annie exhaled slowly, attention releasing from her shoulders, though not entirely. She smoothed the coat over her lap, pressing her small hands against it as if it could carry the warmth and protection she wished to give her brother. Daniel noticed the subtle movements, the brushing of her fingers, the gentle fold of the coat, the tiny rise and fall of her chest with each breath, and realized that in her small body lay a resolve far beyond her years. She had acted with the clarity and courage that few adults could summon. Lillian, sensing her daughter's anxiety, whispered softly, "You've been so brave today, Annie. So very brave." Annie shook her head. "I just wanted him to live," she whispered, her voice trembling only slightly. Daniel leaned forward, resting a hand near hers without touching. "And he will," he said firmly. "Because of what you've done." Courage brought him here, and now the doctors will carry it forward. Annie's eyes flicked toward him, searching for assurance. Even if I can't do anything else. Yes, Daniel said, even then, courage and determination are enough. They've carried you this far, haven't? She nodded slowly, her small body relaxing just a fraction. Daniel could see that the act of giving, of taking responsibility, had anchored her in a way that words could not entirely capture. The coat was more than fabric. It was a talisman, a symbol of her bravery, and the bridge that had allowed her brother to reach the operating room. The intercom buzzed softly, announcing that updates would be provided every 15 minutes. Daniel exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Time passed with deliberate slowness. He noticed the other families in the waiting area. Observing their quiet gestures, clutching hands, shared whispers, tiny acts of reassurance, he realized how fragile hope was, how carefully it must be nurtured, and how one small act of courage could ripple outward, changing outcomes that otherwise seemed beyond reach. Annie glanced up at him. Sir, will you stay? Yes, Daniel said, his tone calm but certain. I'm staying. I'll be right here. You're not alone. She leaned back slightly, her small shoulders easing into the reassurance, though her eyes continued to flick toward the operating room doors. Daniel felt the responsibility deepen, not for the surgery itself which rested in skilled hands, but for the presence he could provide, the calm stability beside Annie and Lillian while the uncertainty persisted. He understood in a way he never had in the sterile confines of a boardroom. The difference a steady caring presence could make in a moment of crisis. Minutes passed slowly, marked by the occasional footstep, the low hum of equipment, and the faint murmur of distant voices. Daniel's attention drifted to the coat in Annie's lap. Its warmth seemed symbolic now, not merely physical. It represented courage, determination, and hope in a world that had otherwise offered little assurance. He realized that material wealth, influence, and power could provide access. But courage and love, quiet, unassuming, relentless, were what truly sustained life in moments like this. Annie's fingers smoothed the seams again. I hope he knows how much we love him, she whispered. Almost to herself, Daniel glanced at her, the depth of her care and determination striking him more profoundly than any negotiation or strategic decision ever had. He will, he said softly. He will feel it, and that will give him strength, just like your courage has given you strength today. The doors to the operating room opened slightly and a nurse stepped out, motioning for Lillian and Annie. Daniel rose and straightened the coat over his arm. Shall we go? He asked. Annie looked up at him. You're coming. Yes, he said. I'm staying with you. They followed the nurse down the corridor, Daniel walking just behind, offering presence without interference. The pre-op area was quiet, purposeful, with a rhythm unlike the lobby or waiting room. Daniel observed the efficiency of the staff, the careful, deliberate steps of the medical team, and the way every movement was designed to protect, to care, and to guide. It was a controlled chaos, a choreography of life, and he felt a deep respect for the people who worked here. Inside the room, Noah lay on the stretcher, small and fragile, monitors beeping softly, tubes and wires attached. Annie moved immediately to his side, brushing her fingers against his tiny hand. Daniel remained near the doorway, careful to be present, but not intrusive. Annie, Lillian whispered, adjusting Noah's blanket. You've been so brave today. I just wanted him to live, Annie replied softly. Daniel leaned closer. And he will, he said. Your courage brought him here. The doctors will do the rest. Annie's eyes met his. Even if I can't do anything else. Yes, Daniel said firmly. That is enough. Courage, love, and hope. These are powerful forces. The anesthesiologist entered, calm and methodical. We're ready. Parents may stay for a moment while we prepare him. Then a nurse will take him into surgery. Lillian nodded tightly, clutching Annie's hand. Daniel remained near the edge of the room, observing, ensuring his presence offered stability. The team worked efficiently, checking vitals and preparing Noah for anesthesia. Annie held the coat on her lap, her eyes tracking every movement with careful focus, her small body a study in tension and determination. Sir, Annie whispered, will it hurt him? Daniel crouched slightly. No, he'll be asleep. He won't feel anything. That's why the doctors are here to make him safe. Annie exhaled, her shoulders relaxing fractionally. She smoothed the coat across her lap once more, the fabric serving as a small but powerful comfort. Daniel felt a quiet admiration for her courage, recognizing that the bravery of a child could influence events in profound, tangible ways. The team wheeled Noah into the operating room. Annie leaned forward, brushing his small hand and whispering a quiet goodbye. Daniel remained near the doorway, a steadfast presence, observing the scene as the doors closed behind them. Outside, the hallway was hushed. Daniel adjusted the coat over his arm, feeling its warmth as more than just fabric, an emblem of hope, courage, and responsibility. The weight of the morning, the coat, the bill. Annie's bravery had settled upon him, but it carried a clarity he had not anticipated. Decisions here were Measured not in numbers, not in efficiency, but in life itself. He looked at Annie and Lillian, their small gestures, the tension in their bodies, and felt an unshakable awareness, presence, courage, and attention mattered as much as skill and preparation. Minutes continued, heavy with expectation. Daniel remained vigilant, silent, aware that the courage of a child, the love of a mother, and his own choice to act had created a chain of events that might forever change the course of these small lives. In that quiet, suspended moment, he realized that even the smallest acts, when carried with resolve and compassion, could ripple outward, touching and shaping the world in ways no spreadsheet or meeting ever could. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the weight of responsibility settle comfortably into resolve. He remained seated, coat draped across his arm, eyes on Annie, fully aware that the morning had altered him as profoundly as it had saved a life, and that the lessons of courage, love, and decisive action would resonate far beyond the sterile walls of the hospital. The minutes in the waiting area stretched into what felt like hours. Daniel Carter remained seated near Annie and Lillian. The coat folded neatly on Annie's lap, its warmth a small comfort against the tension that hung in the room. Each passing second weighed heavily. Yet Daniel noticed the subtle ways the two of them carried themselves. The slight adjustments in posture, the quiet clasping of hands, the way Annie's fingers lightly smoothed the coat's worn fabric. These small gestures spoke volumes about the resilience and courage of a child forced into circumstances far beyond her years. Daniel's usual world of spreadsheets, boardrooms, and negotiations seemed almost irrelevant here. Life was raw, unpredictable, and entirely dependent on human care and attention. Annie looked up at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Sir, do you think he's okay?" Daniel crouched slightly, leaning in to meet her gaze. "He is," he said firmly. "He's in the best hands. The doctors are skilled and experienced, and now it's our job to stay calm for him." Annie nodded, her small shoulders tensing slightly before relaxing again as if she were bracing herself for every possibility. She pressed the coat to her lap, holding it tightly, and Daniel felt the weight of her determination radiating from her. It was more than bravery. It was responsibility incarnate. Lillian turned to Daniel, her voice quiet but imbued with deep gratitude. "I still can't believe you've been here the whole time. That you've done so much for us already." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said softly. "I did it because it had to be done. Someone had to act and waiting wasn't an option." Annie's small voice broke in, tentative but persistent. "Sir, why did you help us?" Daniel paused, considering the question. "Because courage deserves recognition," he said finally. "And because sometimes doing what's right matters more than convenience or comfort." Annie looked down at the coat, her fingers running along the seams as if they could impart some of her strength to her brother. "I just hope it's enough," she whispered. "It is," Daniel said firmly. "More than enough. Courage and love have a power of their own. They carried you here and they'll carry him through the surgery." The intercom crackled softly, announcing a nurse's voice. "The patient is now in the operating room. We will provide updates as needed." Lillian exhaled slowly, relief and lingering anxiety mingling in her expression. "That's good," she said, her hand tightening on Annie's. Daniel nodded, glancing toward the closed doors. "Now it's up to them. Our job is to stay here, to be present, to hope and trust that our actions brought him to this moment." Annie tilted her head, brushing the coat against her knees. "Sir, will you stay with us while we wait?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Time passed in heavy, deliberate silence. Daniel observed the rhythm of the hospital around them, the soft shuffle of shoes, distant conversations in muted tones, the occasional hum of medical equipment. He noticed other families in waiting areas, the same anxiety mirrored in their eyes, and the small quiet gestures of reassurance, a hand resting on a child's shoulder, a whispered word, a gentle squeeze of the hand. It struck him how fragile hope was and how it relied on both courage and human presence to remain intact. Annie leaned slightly into her mother, her fingers still pressed against the coat. "I hope he knows how much we love him," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, feeling the depth of her commitment. "He will," he said softly. "And that love will help him through this. You've done everything you can. Now it's time to let the doctors do theirs." The minutes dragged on, marked by the slow movement of nurses and staff passing by. Daniel's thoughts drifted to the events of the morning, the coat, the market, the hospital bill, and the small, unwavering determination of a 6-year-old girl. Every action, every choice, every moment of courage had led them here. The scale of responsibility, the stakes of life and death had crystallized in a way Daniel had never experienced before. Annie's small hand brushed the coat, her movements absent-minded but deliberate, as if the fabric could anchor her brother's life. Daniel admired the simplicity of her determination, the unshakable belief that one small action could change the course of events. He realized that this courage, so pure and unshielded, was the truest measure of strength he had ever witnessed. The doors of the operating room opened slightly, and a nurse appeared, signaling for Lillian and Annie to follow. Daniel rose, straightening the coat over his arm. Shall we? He asked. Annie looked at him anxiously. You're coming. Yes, he said. I'm staying. They followed the nurse down the quiet corridor. Daniel observed the precision and deliberation of the staff, each step purposeful, each action meaningful. The pre-op area was calm, efficient, yet each movement carried the weight of life itself. Daniel recognized that no negotiation, no calculation could match the immediacy and importance of presence in this room. Inside, Noah lay on the stretcher, small and fragile, monitors beeping softly, wires and tubes attached. Annie moved immediately to his side, brushing her fingers along his tiny hand, while Daniel remained near the doorway, present but unobtrusive. Annie, Lillian whispered, you've been so brave today. I just wanted him to live, Annie replied softly. Daniel leaned in slightly. And he will, he said, because of your courage. Because of the actions you took. And now, because of the doctor's skill, courage, and determination brought him here. That is enough, Annie's eyes met his. Even if I can't do anything else. Yes, Daniel said firmly. Even then, courage, hope, and love carry more weight than you realize. The anesthesiologist approached, calm and deliberate. We're ready. Parents may stay briefly while we prepare him. Then, a nurse will take him into the operating room. Lillian nodded, gripping Annie's hand. Daniel stayed near the edge of the room, ensuring his presence offered comfort without intrusion. The team worked efficiently, preparing Noah for anesthesia, checking vitals and making sure everything was in place. Annie's hands remained on the coat, her eyes fixed on every movement, embodying the quiet, concentrated hope of a child who had carried far too much. Sir, Annie whispered again. Will it hurt him? Daniel crouched. Slightly. No, he'll be asleep. He won't feel anything. That's why the doctors are here to keep him safe. Annie exhaled, her shoulders relaxing fractionally. She smoothed the coat across her lap once more, holding it like a talisman. Daniel felt a deep admiration for her bravery, recognizing that courage, even in its smallest form, could influence the world in ways that no experience, wealth, or knowledge ever could. Noah was then wheeled into the operating room. Annie leaned forward, brushing his hand lightly, whispering a quiet farewell. Daniel remained nearby, a steady presence, observing as the doors closed behind them. The hallway outside was still, punctuated only by the soft hum of equipment and distant footsteps. Daniel adjusted the coat on his arm, feeling its warmth as a symbol of courage, responsibility, and the small acts that had carried them this far. The weight of the morning, the coat, the market, the hospital bill. Annie's bravery had settled upon him, but it was a weight tempered by clarity and purpose. Here, decisions were not measured in numbers, charts, or profit, but in life itself. He looked at Annie and Lillian, their subtle movements, their quiet gestures, and understood fully that presence, courage, and attention mattered as much as skill and preparation in the face of uncertainty. Minutes passed with deliberate slowness, each tick of the clock carrying a profound weight. Daniel remained vigilant, aware that the courage of a child, the devotion of a mother, and his own choice to act had created a chain of events that might permanently alter the course of these lives. In that suspended moment, he realized that even the smallest acts executed with determination and love could ripple outward to shape the world in ways far beyond immediate perception. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension in his chest ease and settled fully into the quiet resolve of presence, ready to witness the next chapter of hope and life unfolding before him. The waiting room was quiet, save for the soft hum of monitors and the distant footsteps of hospital staff. Daniel Carter sat near Annie and Lillian, his gaze fixed on the closed doors of the operating room. Every minute that passed stretched long and heavy, each second carrying the weight of uncertainty. Annie, her small hands resting over the coat, seemed to grow smaller in her chair with the tension of waiting. Yet there was a determined steadiness in her posture that spoke of the courage she had mustered all morning. Daniel, used to the clarity of business decisions and the predictable outcomes of his world, felt that same weight pressing on him. Yet unlike any challenge he had ever faced, this was life itself, unpredictable, fragile, and reliant on human resolve. Annie finally broke the silence. Sir, how long will it take? Daniel leaned slightly closer, resting a hand near her without touching. A gesture of calm presence. Surgery like this, it can take a few hours, he said gently. But the doctors are skilled and prepared. They'll do everything to ensure he's safe. She nodded, clutching the coat tightly, smoothing its fabric over her lap. I hope he knows how much we love him, she whispered. Daniel studied her. He will, he said. Even if he doesn't understand right now, he'll feel it. Love and courage are powerful things. Lillian reached over, brushing a stray hair from Annie's forehead. You've been incredibly brave today, she said softly. Both of you. Annie shook her head. I just wanted him to live, she whispered. Daniel exhaled slowly, recognizing the weight she had carried. And because of that, he has a chance. That's what matters now. The nurse returned to the hallway, checking the monitors outside the operating room. Everything is proceeding as planned, she said. We'll provide updates regularly. Daniel nodded, feeling a quiet relief. But the tension in his chest remained. Every heartbeat seemed magnified, each one a reminder of the fragility of life and the immense responsibility they had all shouldered. He glanced down at Annie, who now rested her forehead against the coat, silently willing her brother through the surgery. "Sir," Annie whispered, lifting her eyes. "Do you think he'll be scared when he wakes up?" Daniel crouched slightly beside her. "Maybe at first," he said. "But he'll be safe and he'll know he's loved. That's what will give him strength." Annie nodded slowly, pressing the coat against her lap. Daniel could feel the tension in the room easing only slightly. Waiting was its own kind of trial, the slow stretching of time into anxious anticipation. He understood now that courage wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was about enduring uncertainty, holding hope steady when the world seemed uncertain. The hallway remained still, the faint mechanical hum, the only sound breaking the silence. Daniel's eyes wandered, noticing other families waiting, their quiet gestures of reassurance mirroring Annie's own. The presence of care, the attentive calm carried weight beyond any tangible action. It reminded him that responsibility was not just about intervention. It was about witnessing, holding space, and being present when life demanded it most. Annie tilted her head, brushing the coat with her fingers. "Sir, will Mama be okay while we wait?" "She will," Daniel said. "She's strong, and she's been through so much already. But you're helping her, too. Your calm, your courage, your presence. That matters as much as anything else right now." Annie exhaled slowly, a small measure of relief softening her shoulders. Daniel could see the subtle signs of her release, the tiny shift in posture, the smoothing of the coat, the slight rise and fall of her chest. Every gesture, though small, carried meaning, and he felt the weight of her determination and resilience in the quiet moments of observation. The minutes continued to pass, measured by soft footsteps and faint mechanical hums. Daniel reflected on the events that had led them here. The coat, the market, the hospital bill, the small but undeniable courage of a child. Each element had been a link in a chain, leading to this fragile, pivotal moment. He realized that courage could ripple outward, influencing outcomes far beyond what any individual could anticipate. Annie's gaze drifted to the doors of the operating room. "Sir, will he know we were here for him?" "Yes," Daniel said, "and he'll feel it. That love and courage you've shown will guide him through." A nurse appeared at the end of the hall, signaling that the surgery was progressing smoothly. Daniel exhaled, feeling the tension in his chest ease fractionally. He adjusted the coat over his arm, noting its warmth not just as physical comfort, but as a symbol of connection, courage, and responsibility. Annie leaned slightly into her mother, the coat still folded on her lap. "I hope it's enough," she whispered. Daniel shook his head firmly. "It is more than enough. Courage and love are stronger than any challenge." Even in moments like this, the doors of the operating room opened and the nurse appeared again to signal that it was time for them to move closer. Daniel rose, adjusting the coat. "Let's go," he said. Annie looked at him anxiously. "You're coming?" "Yes," he replied. "I'm staying." They followed the nurse down the corridor. The pre-op area was calm, efficient, and purposeful. Every step carried weight, every movement had meaning. Daniel noted the precision of the staff, the care with which they moved, and the subtle touches of reassurance given to other children. It was a choreography of life, guided by skill, compassion, and determination. Inside, Noah lay on the stretcher, small and fragile, attached to monitors. Annie immediately moved to his side, brushing her fingers against his tiny hand. Daniel remained near the doorway, present but unobtrusive. "Annie," Lillian whispered, "you've been brave today." "I just wanted him to live," Annie said softly. Daniel leaned slightly closer. "And he will," he said. "Your courage brought him here. The doctors will do the rest." The anesthesiologist entered. "We're ready. Parents may stay briefly while we prepare him. Then a nurse will take him into surgery." Lillian nodded, gripping Annie's hand. Daniel remained near the edge, observing. The team worked efficiently, preparing Noah for anesthesia. Annie held the coat tightly, eyes fixed on every movement, embodying quiet hope and determination. "Sir, will it hurt him?" Annie whispered. "No," Daniel said. "He'll be asleep. He won't feel anything. That's why the doctors are here to keep him safe." Annie exhaled, relaxing slightly. She brushed the coat across her lap. Daniel watched her, admiring her courage, realizing that bravery, even in the smallest hands, could influence life profoundly. Noah was then wheeled into the operating room. Annie leaned forward, brushing his hand, whispering a farewell. Daniel remained nearby, observing as the doors closed behind them. Outside, the hallway was still. Daniel adjusted the coat on his arm. Its warmth a symbol of courage, connection, and responsibility. The weight of the morning, the coat, the market, the hospital bill. Annie's bravery had settled heavily on him, tempered by clarity. Here, decisions were not about numbers, profit, or schedules. They were about life itself. Presence, courage, and attention mattered as much as skill and preparation. Minutes passed slowly. Daniel remained vigilant, aware that the courage of a child, the devotion of a mother, and his own choice to act had created a chain of events that could forever change these lives. In that quiet, suspended moment, he realized that even the smallest acts carried with determination and love could ripple outward to shape the world in ways that exceeded expectation. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease, and settled fully into his role as witness and guardian of hope, ready to face whatever the next moments would bring. The operating room doors opened with a soft, almost imperceptible click, and a nurse emerged, her face calm, but carrying a hint of relief. Daniel, Annie, and Lillian rose immediately, all three moving toward the staff with careful anticipation. "The surgery went well," she said quietly. "Noah is stable and in recovery. He's breathing on his own and his vitals are strong. You may see him shortly." Relief surged through Daniel in a way he hadn't expected. Months of business decisions, meetings, and strategies had never carried this kind of weight or clarity. This was life itself, fragile yet resilient and now slightly steadier. Because of their combined courage, Annie let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's okay," she whispered, gripping the coat tightly. As if holding it gave her strength, Lillian's eyes filled with tears, her hand tightening around Annie's. "Oh, thank God," she murmured. Daniel reached out subtly, placing a steadying hand near Annie without intruding, offering silent reassurance. The trio followed the nurse down the corridor to the recovery room, each step deliberate, careful, measured with hope. Inside, Noah lay in a small hospital bed, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, monitors beeping a calm, reassuring pattern. Annie moved closer immediately, brushing a gentle hand over her brother's tiny fingers. Daniel remained nearby, observing quietly, aware of the delicate balance between action and presence. Lillian leaned over Noah, smoothing his blanket and whispering words of comfort. "He's awake now," she said softly. "You're safe, baby. Mommy and Annie are here." Annie whispered, "Sir, he's awake." "Really awake?" Daniel nodded, his voice calm but filled with quiet emotion. "Yes, he is. And you did this. Your courage made it possible." Annie's small shoulders rose slightly, the tension in her body easing just enough to allow her to take a deep breath. "I just wanted him to live," she said softly, looking at her brother. Daniel exhaled slowly. "And he will. That's all that matters." The nurse adjusted Noah's IV, checking his vitals carefully and then stepped back. "He's stable now, but he'll need close monitoring over the next few hours," she said. "Try to stay close, but don't stress yourself. Recovery takes time." Annie leaned closer to Noah, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "We're right here," she whispered. Daniel watched the scene, feeling the profound simplicity of love, courage, and presence, realizing how far removed this was from the structured, calculated world he normally inhabited. Here, outcomes were influenced not by numbers or strategy, but by bravery, human care, and compassion. Lillian turned to Daniel, her eyes glistening with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. You've done more than anyone could have expected." Daniel shook his head, a small smile forming. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it had to be done. You, Annie, you showed the courage. I just made sure it counted." Annie's eyes met his. "Even if I can't do anything else." "Yes," Daniel said. "Even then, courage like yours carries immense power." The hours passed slowly. Noah's breathing remained steady, the monitors beeping consistently, and Daniel stayed near Annie and Lillian, a silent witness to their relief, their quiet gestures of love, and the unfolding of a fragile, miraculous recovery. Annie pressed the coat to her lap again, running her fingers along its seams, as if the fabric could somehow hold the entirety of her hope in her brother's survival. Finally, Noah's eyes fluttered open fully, his gaze landing first on Annie, then on Lillian, then on Daniel, taking in the presence of those who had carried him to safety. A faint smile appeared on his lips, and Annie leaned closer, brushing his fingers gently. "It's okay, Noah, you're safe," she whispered. Daniel felt a swell of emotion he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. This was beyond business, beyond strategy. This was pure human consequence, a tangible result of courage, empathy, and timely action. He realized more fully than ever that small acts of bravery could ripple outward, changing lives irrevocably. Lillian wrapped a hand around Annie, holding her close. "We're all here now," she whispered. "We made it through." Annie's small voice trembled with relief. "We did," she said softly. Pressing the coat against her brother again, Daniel watched them, noticing the subtle interactions, the squeeze of a hand, the gentle brushing of hair, the quiet reassurances whispered in small voices. These moments were profound, fragile, yet undeniably powerful. He understood that courage and human connection were forces stronger than any obstacle, any risk, any calculation he had ever faced. As the day waned, the light through the hospital windows softened, casting warm golden streaks across the floor. Daniel remained seated near them, the coat folded over his arm, a quiet symbol of the courage and hope that had carried this family through the morning. Annie's small hands rested lightly on her brother. Lillian's eyes glimmered with gratitude, and Noah slept peacefully, unaware of how close he had come to losing everything. Daniel exhaled, slowly, letting the weight in his chest ease. The chain of events, the coat, the market, the hospital bill, Annie's courage, and his own decision to act had created a moment of clarity, a demonstration of the profound impact of presence and compassion. He realized that the lessons of this day would resonate far beyond the hospital walls, that courage, empathy, and timely action could create outcomes that no calculation or strategy could predict. Annie finally leaned against her mother, her small body exhausted but calm. "Thank you, sir," she whispered softly, her eyes closing briefly. Daniel nodded, a rare, genuine smile forming. "No, Annie," he said quietly. "Thank you. You reminded me what matters most." The nurse returned, checking Noah's vitals one last time before he was transferred to a private room for continued monitoring. "Everything looks good," she said. "He's stable. And the surgery was successful. You may stay with him now." Annie and Lillian moved closer to the bed, Annie brushing her fingers along her brother's hand, her face soft with relief and wonder. Daniel remained nearby, watching, recognizing the full magnitude of the morning's events. The bravery of a child, the devotion of a mother, the power of timely action, and the quiet strength of presence. As the sunlight shifted toward evening, Daniel felt a profound sense of completion of witnessing something greater than himself. The morning's chaos, the market, the hospital bill, the coat, and Annie's courage had all converged to create this moment. Life preserved, hope realized, and the subtle but undeniable impact of human action fully revealed. He exhaled, letting himself absorb the weight and relief of the day. Annie leaned against Lillian, Noah resting safely between them. And Daniel knew that courage, love, and presence had carried the day. In that quiet hospital room, he understood perhaps for the first time that the smallest acts, the simplest gestures could create ripples strong enough to save lives, alter futures, and leave an enduring mark on the world. He looked at the family, at the coat, at the fragile, miraculous life before him, and felt quietly and completely that he had witnessed something extraordinary. The story teaches a powerful lesson about the impact of courage, empathy, and timely action. It shows that even the smallest acts of bravery, like a child's selfless determination, can ripple outward to save lives and transform the lives of others. True heroism is not measured by wealth, status, or power, but by the willingness to act, to care, and to stand up for those in need. Reminding us that compassion and presence are among the most profound forces in the world. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration,